I guess it's the sign of a good game that I can still enjoy this without ever having played Warhammers 1 through 39,999. Alright boys, let's show... Oh, well, I guess it's time to stop playing. What now? Hey Parapug, any more old memories coming back? After you exploded and then were replaced by a newer model of ghost-detecting robot dog, you've been acting strangely, seeming to remember bits from the previous model's data. Also, remember to set an alarm for my writing class. I don't want to miss it again.
A cursory scan has identified a mild but erroneous data leak. Functionality should remain unhindered.
Well, alright. Since tidings are dark with Darktide, what should I play in the meantime?
My scan has determined the Callisto Protocol 2022 to be a game.
What? Do you not know me at all? This is all of the thought you've put into it?
The digital deluxe version is only $7.999 USD.
$80? What is this, the future? Is this Mega Man times? I could buy 80 things with that.
The digital deluxe version includes a season pass, which includes
what are
a
these
collection
words?
of cosmetic skins.
Wait, is this an ad? Are you integrating ads into our interactions now?
Yes.
I swear to God, if the next words out of your mouth aren't no, I'm sorry, no, Wait, did you say yes?
Yes.
Right. Wait, what did I say I was gonna do? I forget, but I'm already playing Nocturne, so...
Dreams, place, not a dream. It's in the writing. If not
What's up, Goth Gamer Nation? Nocturne is a third-person action-adventure alternate history pulp survival horror game and normalizing workplace monster discrimination simulator. It was developed by Terminal Reality for the PC and published by Gathering of Developers in the year 1999, joining a long list of games from the era that were meant to be ported to Dreamcast but weren't because nothing good ever happens. It has bafflingly, as of my writing, still remained unavailable for purchase, incompatible with most systems, and ferried into this century by the grace of a handful of weird nerds unwilling to let a brilliant spark be snuffed out. Terminal Reality was founded in Texas in 1994 by Brett Combs and Mark Randall, two former software developers working from home. Their first game, Terminal Velocity, a rather simplistic flight combat game, was the product of their pooled money and resources. Its success brought them millions of dollars and a quickly expanded studio. In the years between Terminal Velocity and Nocturne, the studio would make a name for themselves primarily pumping out two different kinds of game, none of which were atmospheric horror games, but instead monster truck games and more flight combat games, which there was no shortage of at the time and began to see diminishing returns. The type of games my eyes would glaze over upon seeing on the shelf, my interest in them so barren that they may as well have been a word processor. My brain can't handle that many vectors. Some of these made some interesting choices, like 1996's Hellbender, which prominently featured the voice of X-Files star Gillian Anderson.
Hull partially repaired. Scion frigate destroyed. Scion frigate destroyed.
Oh my god. Is Scully in the room with me right now? It doesn't usually look like this. No, wait, don't look at that. I will say all of their flight combat games had absolutely killer soundtracks that really get your blood pumping. I mean it, these tracks are so good I could die. They make me want to murder. However, it was soon made clear that Terminal Reality was looking to diversify their output. The impetus for Nocturne came as a result of Mark Randall's work developing their own in-house engine, one that made dynamic, cinematic lighting its focus. The world and characters of the game were largely already dreamt up and doodled down by the studio's first employee, Drew Hayworth. Aside from pulp magazines, inspiration was drawn from films like Miller's Crossing, Evil Dead, and Freaks to construct this alternate history 1930s where a secret government agency is tasked with protecting the world from numerous supernatural threats, thanklessly working in the shadows, saving the world every day from ghosts and goblins, all in the name of the good old USA. What a time. Women could vote. I'm sure there were other things we did. We may have invented the toaster, but we were still figuring it out, so it was still kind of... To better understand the trans-dimensional pocket that Nocturne was left to, it might help to know a little bit about their publisher, Gathering of Developers. It was formed a year before Nocturne's release by Mark Wilson, the former CEO of IonStorm, to be a publishing company made up primarily of industry-hardened game developers instead of corporate suits. Brett Combs would make Terminal Reality an equity partner with Gathering of Developers alongside studios like Ritual Entertainment and 3D Realms. From the outset, Terminal Reality found creative control and IP rights important, so this was a natural pairing. Now, nobody could run off with Nocturne and pump out a bunch of half-baked sequels without their input. Unfortunately, the dream of this game publishing co-op would be dashed when, predictably, a bigger publisher would swallow it whole. In this case, Take-Two. Nocturne was released to polarizing reviews, but with a slant towards the positive. GameSpy would rate it highly and surmise, for horror fans, this is probably the best game that will be released this year. For everyone else, it's still well worth the purchase. They would follow through with this and award it their Adventure Game of the Year award in 1999. Others were not so thrilled. Computer Gaming World would give it 1.5 stars, writing, "When you get right down to it, only those starved for a horror game will consider Nocturne a worthwhile purchase. The pulp horror concept is attractive, but the execution is horrific," citing the game's controls and intense for the time system requirements as standout issues. It also required just over a gig of space, which was unheard of. Much like GameSpy, they would give it some kind of award, but in this case it was the Coaster of the Month award, implying that the Nocturne disc would be better suited as a coaster for your beverage, just as the pages of Computer Gaming World were better suited lining the inside of a sick dog's kennel. Nevertheless, it sold well enough, and the game's engine was clearly their golden ticket to more games, with Nocturne intentionally structured in an episodic form that could continue indefinitely. At E3 99 to Y2K, Nocturne would continue to be shown off with several other games published by Gathering of Developers, like Max Payne, Grand Theft Auto 2, and Heavy Metal Fact 2. Not inside the showroom floor, but ever the anti-establishment rebels in a parking lot opposite the building, where they had essentially a party that served food, alcohol, and live music blaring over the sound of LA traffic, something they would repeat the following year, only ramping up the adult nature of the show by a few notches, leading to a moment in E3 history that is described in the book Sex in Video Games as a new low for the escalating booth babe presence that had already become a fixture of the event. The point is, things were looking great for Gathering of Developers. Things were peak the year 2000. Look at that. Look at these gamers. That could be you. You want that? Is this what you want? This is what's waiting for you. So put down your fucking Nintendo. While a design document was being put together for Nocturne 2, the original's engine was used to create a series of games using the Blair Witch IP. But that also served more or less as backdoor sequels to Nocturne. Some of the other studios, still with Gathering of Developers, contributed to this trilogy as well, though none of these really took off nearly as much as Nocturne. In an IGN interview for the first of these games, the last thing Terminal Reality would be asked was if Nocturne would get a sequel, and they describe what they had planned as a 2-year game, which seems laughable now that 2 years was too long a turnaround for them to safely commit to, adding that there's no real promise that you'll make your money back, so we're looking at it carefully. I noticed this tragic consistency in interviews with Terminal Reality. So in this IGN interview, they are asked why they are doing a Blair Witch game, especially since the film was ubiquitous enough that it was mostly seen as a joke by 2001.
We're going to be going into the woods to find the Blair Thumb.
And at this time, they had an extensive Nocturne 2 design document in the works. You can find some remainders of it online. So it's safe to say they wanted to make a sequel, and that was likely what their next project was meant to be. So they answer that question something like, well, we had doubts when Blair Witch was kicked around the office and didn't see it as a good match, but the more we did start thinking about it, the more it was a good match. I don't know. They then say, I think from a market appeal, we've got a recognizable name and a recognizable symbol, and that can work for and against us. Referring to the Blair Witch Twigman, that is pretty much the franchise's only consistent iconography. And that really sounds like something that a publisher pitched to them as a reason to go for this. It sounds like really boring corporate reasoning. Once I read that, though, I was propelled 8 years into the future. It's 2009, a golden era of gaming. Resident Evil on the Nintendo Wii, and Peter Molyneux's devised a way to replace your dead child using an Xbox Kinect.
You have finished your school project.
And the last faint blip of life emitting from Nocturne's flatline comes about when Terminal Reality's revamped Infernal engine is being shown off to publishers using an HD redesign of Stranger, the lead character in Nocturne. This led to many sad, weird nerds assuming that they were finally getting around to Nocturne 2. 10th anniversary, baby! Finally, this game that came out 10 years ago that nobody talks about is getting its unanticipated sequel. What am I doing? Stranger's not coming back. Unless, hear me out. What if, hypothetically, he came back? No, they ultimately did not work on Nocturne 2. Instead, they moved forward with Ghostbusters the video game. If you didn't know they did that game, you might be thinking what I thought when I first heard about it. This is not Nocturne 2. I'm angry. I'm so very angry that you're not making the video game I want you to make. Go fuck. But the connection I made was in the way Mark Randall, founder of Terminal Reality, lead programmer for Nocturne, justified this project right to Jeff Keighley's fucking Affliction hoodie.
It's an interesting story. We were on the West Coast pitching our own original title to Sierra, and they said, wow, that's great, we love the technology, but how about Ghostbusters? They had just done a study. They found out the ghost with a line through it was the second most recognized symbol in the world.
It makes me wonder if both the pitches that led to licensed games for Blair Witch and Ghostbusters began as Nocturne 2 pitches and ended with a publisher saying, what about X? This is recognizable, look at the logo, people know that. Then it really makes sense why they had to stubbornly and stealthily find ways to continue building on their creation under different monikers.
What the hell is going on here? I've never heard of Damites this far north.
The natives call them Damites.
So back to 2001, the nation is rocked by tragedy for one reason and one reason only. The lack of Nocturne 2. The year Gathering of Developers, or GOD as it was sometimes referred to, was doing this, which is a move I'm all too familiar with thanks to all the times I spilled the contents of a burrito on myself. Terminal Reality would finally pitch Nocturne 2 to Gathering of Developers, but due to mounting financial instability, they would pass on it. The company was quickly bleeding out. I'm going to guess randomly, thanks to Duke Nukem Forever's production. I have no evidence proving this, but somehow I know this. Just don't ask me how. This led to Gathering of Developers being sold outright to Take-Two. Within the year, one of its co-founders would die suddenly of an asthma attack, and the rest of its key figures would leave. Unwilling to trust the Nocturne IP in the hands of another publisher, they just held on to it, feeling it had potential. So, not ready to pull the trigger on Nocturne 2, Terminal Reality began developing Blood Rain, which was meant to be a more mainstream title that would maintain the spirit of Nocturne, but they would play the AAA publisher game and relinquish control of its rights. Blood Rain would, less overtly than Blair Witch for obvious reasons, include several references and share some locations and creatures with Nocturne. The titular Rain was even developed to be a legally different variation of the Nocturne character Svetlana Lupescu. Early test footage of Blood Rain shows off her initial design, which was pretty identical to how she looked in Blair Witch. What the hell? Why are you standing like that, Svetlana? At ease, soldier. What I take away from this is that, well, I think Nocturne's creators were right in their thinking that they had something special with their game, because all these years later, there still isn't much you can point to that filled the vacuum it left. It's a collection of ideas so charming and novel that it's almost bizarre that it didn't continue. That glowing GameSpy review concluded by expressing excitement for the franchise's future, remarking that even though it doesn't have the replayability of some multiplayer games, they could see themselves revisiting the original 4 chapters of Nocturne. And I think I was someone who was in this same mindset. I never doubted for a second that there wouldn't be more Nocturne, because it was obvious. that there was supposed to be more. On a long enough time span, that faith has waned a bit, and you recognize that you've been coping in slow motion. You know, you get to 2010, and not only has there not been the Nocturne movie or TV show that was announced, there hasn't even been a Nocturne 2. Nobody's even talking about it anymore. And furthermore, there's no legit way to even play the original Nocturne. With every passing year, Windows becomes more and more unable to understand how to prevent itself from breaking, much less run a now obscure game from the 90s. So while I applaud its creators for cherishing their creation enough to protect it from a fate worse than death, at some point I think you could have loosened that grip a little bit. Now nobody gets it. Great! Just great! I'll keep it straight with you. I like this game. Maybe even love it. Maybe even super love it. Maybe it's one of my favorite games. I'll never tell. A Prohibition-era X-Files following a hateful, emotionally stunted weirdo with a history he's trying to drown in work? If ever there was a self-insert character. In 1897, the American Mutoscope Company produced a short film named Peeping Tom, viewable only on Mutoscope devices, a competitor to Thomas Edison's kinetoscope, and only to those willing to part with a penny. If you were to look it up now, you'd find a different short altogether, though admittedly one that follows a similar storyline. Time has bled together the memory of Peeping Tom and 1901's Par le trou de la serrure, or What is Seen Through the Keyhole. Both films concern a sex pervert that spies on women through comically large keyholes. That is until he has served a hefty helping of karmic justice and is roughed up by some guy. History and memory are often at odds with each other. Maybe there's some time, some when, where both films existed as Peeping Tom. Maybe we've only caught faded glimpses into worlds not meant for us. Or maybe Americans made so many dirty pervert films that you were meant to watch in public while hunched over, sweating into a 4-foot 8-inch metal tube that it's hard to keep track of them all. One thing's for sure. The American Mutoscope Company's studio was built on the roof of what was then called the Hackett-Carhart Building, a cast-iron monster in Soho, one of the first of its kind to not hide the material that served as its facade. The architect what designed it, Richard Morris Hunt, reckoned, "Iron need not pretend that it was made of something else." Years later, the building's name would change to what it is now known as, the Roosevelt Building, named after the owner of the land the building sat on, James Henry Roosevelt, a man who would have been a doctor if he wasn't dying of polio all the time. He stopped doing that in 1863, when he was buried at New York's Marble Cemetery. At some point, they dug him up and moved his desiccated corpse to the grounds of the Roosevelt Hospital, also named after him. But then, whoever did that changed their mind and shipped him back to Marble Cemetery. The vibe was off. James Roosevelt didn't have any relation to Theodore Roosevelt, America's 26th president, that we know of. I guess he could have. He was governor of New York around then, so... Right? Being a politically conservative man, and one deeply concerned with projecting an image of masculinity, regularly practicing jujitsu, boxing, well until he was wrecked so hard he went blind in one eye, it's not hard to imagine he'd be out on the streets of New York, and he'd look up at the building that would soon bear his namesake, with eyes that would soon have the power of one, step inside and enjoy a viewing of Peeping Tom, if it ever existed at all. But it would be hard to picture him killing a werewolf while on vacation in Cuba. And that's just what the video game Nocturne proposes. After his dust-up with the werewolf, he founded a secret government organization to quietly defend the US against the paranormal, referred to informally as Spook House. Roosevelt would hire a collection of mystics, defamed scientists, and monster hunters to Spook House's ranks. Around 1915, Spook House would go international, meddling in the paranormal affairs of other nations. Sometimes their timelines cross paths. Following an event that is vaguely referred to as the Nepalese Demon Horricide Project, a hand would be extended to monsters willing to betray their own kind. Those who agreed were granted clemency, and those who refused were added to the list. We got Doc Holliday, a brilliant scientist, inventor, adventurer that in this game serves as your gadget dispenser, brusquely describing her latest gizmos while wrist deep in a monster on a slab. Wow, completely Freudian monster mash. It just came out suddenly, to my surprise. I am fucking funny, dude. I don't care, dude. There's also Hiram, an empath, Colonel Hapscom, the boss man, originally a soldier in the British Army who was so appalled by Britain's brutal occupation of India that he decided to desert and just help Indian people hunt monsters, until being tapped by Spookhouse. Rounding out the cast, we got Haystack, a former boxer who, thanks to the aid of a traveling circus, was granted what the manual describes as weird, monster-specific gloves. Hey, look, not all these ideas can be winners. Sometimes you want a thing, but don't really want to do the work to get there, so you write it in and you're like, hey, I don't know, even I think this is weird. They got a martial arts trainer named Ken and a demon born in the fires of hell named Moloch, but we've run out of time to explore that further. You'll come across some others throughout the game, and most of them don't play a large role so much as they just display the wildly diverse group of weirdos that makes up Spookhouse. They imply a wealth of stories and backgrounds to pick apart that we'll never be able to. In 1923, our protagonist enters the picture, a stoic, methodical monster hunter without a history, content being referred to simply as Stranger. Next to nothing is shared about Stranger's past or motivations beyond a singular character claiming to know something about him. But the manual hints at a rumor shared around the water cooler that he was kidnapped as an infant by a mysterious brotherhood of priests as per some kind of prophecy, but they have long since disappeared, and Stranger's being a Johnny Tightlips about it. Impersonable, creepy, barely likable, like a wind-up toy full of seething hatred for monsters, and the best thing to do with him is point him towards them and stay out of his way. We get to examine this, deconstruct it a little bit. Why is my voice doing that? Right from the beginning, when, if played chronologically, the first chapter has Stranger partnered with one of his monster co-workers, Svetlana, a half-vampire, half-human Dhampir. With zero tact, he visibly pouts and makes idle threats after being forced to partner up for this mission.
Hi, Svetlana.
Frustratingly, and wonderfully, the story of Nocturne doesn't really function as a complete narrative. It's fractured, like catching episodes of an old TV series out of order, broken into 4 chapters or volumes that are several years apart and missing substantial details. What is clear though is there was a plan, there were answers, and maybe we were even meant to get them at some point, but we can never really know that. The first story concerns an artifact called the Yathfogil Stone, or Yathki, initially believed to be a vampire myth, a magic, petrified heart that gives the owner immunity to vampires' typical weaknesses like sunlight. Svetlana refers to it as the vampire holy grail, simply a legend, to which Stranger passive-aggressively asks,
"What makes you think the grail is a myth?"
Which is sort of the first of many throwaway lines that show how much was in the chamber for the world of Nocturne, as though in some alternate timeline where we got several of these, there would absolutely be a resolution to this interaction. There's a grail, we're finding it, we're gonna track down who's got it, and we're gonna shut him down. Jesus. Man who rose from the dead. Shoot, that sounds like zombie talk to me, motherfucker. Intelligence suggests the stone may have been located in a German castle called Gstaad. Adding to their suspicion are increased reports of supernatural events and monsters in the surrounding area. Colonel Hapscom wants you to retrieve the stone, and when Svetlana asks why, as nobody at Spookhouse, her included, could really benefit from its power, Hapscom brings up their vault of dangerous artifacts that, were any to fall into the wrong hands, could allow someone to rule the world, expressing his belief that it would simply be safer under their watch and their lock and key. This is something that, 10-year-old me was fascinated by, just the thought of this vault. I'm so easily suckered by a vault of mysteries. Like the pilot episode of X-Files, where they spend the whole episode getting an alien implant, and then it's dropped off in a warehouse full of not only more implants, but an untold number of mysterious things. Big fan of that. It's like every line of this simple briefing scene is brimming with potential for other stories. This chapter takes place in 1927, but according to the timeline provided in the manual, 3 years prior to this, Stranger took part in the Hokendire Werewolf Horricide Project.
The entire area is crawling with werewolves.
I thought you killed all the werewolves in Germany.
Oh my god, they all know. Now they know I never killed a werewolf. When the fight broke out, I slipped on a banana peel and fell in the mud and my shoes fell off. Cut 2. We're there, man. We've made the treacherous journey to Falkenberg, a village beneath Castle Gestad. And in a graveyard outside its gates, we are greeted by a man that has seemingly crawled from a grave in a wild ploy to escape the village, that is under the watch of monsters called Sentinels. They both notice a pair of bite marks on his neck, but Svetlana can sense that he is still human, and before we can learn more, he runs off in fear of his life. In the village, the streets are empty save for these winged sentinel creatures and ghouls. But after reducing their numbers, the mayor, holed up with the remaining villagers, welcomes Stranger and Svetlana in. Initially, he simply urges that the two leave, but once they make it clear they have no intention of giving up, he explains that Falkenberg's people have been the victims of oppression from the castle for centuries, and it's recently only gotten worse and worse. He worries that their meddling may attract the wrath of the castle's master, Count Voiku. Rumored to be a vampire, he terrorizes the village with sentinels and kidnapped everyone's daughters, locking them up in his castle. The only reason the remaining villagers have stuck around is concern for their lost children. One point of contention some reviews had at the time, but I think is one of this game's strengths, is that each chapter features not only different monsters and biomes, but embodies different realms of horror. This chapter is obviously the gothic horror level, and as such it plays into a lot of those tropes, working like a Hammer horror film, replete with quaint German villages, a foreboding forest, and a spooky castle full of bats and staircases with no handrails, which makes my hands sweat just thinking about. The next chapter will be a wildly different set of circumstances that abandons all of this. But for now, it makes full use of all these cartoony elements and mostly plays it straight. This is a day at the office for these two, and I guess you could read these leaps in theme as being inconsistent, but I think the tone is always right where it needs to be, in a big part because of Stranger and how much of an alien he is. He's like a hyper-rational pod person that consistently has to deal with not only larger-than-life supernatural threats, but people.
Tell us what you know about Count Voiku and Castle Gestad.
I know nothing.
Stranger, you cannot interrogate these people like criminals. You are scaring them even more.
He's out here ultimately to save people despite not really liking or understanding them. So I feel a certain connection with this character, having a similar aversion to social interactions. The difference being that he still then goes on to help them, whereas I do nothing and am worthless. Yeah, I have no idea where to break for spoilers, so let's just do it here. I don't know. Does it really matter? Are you going to play this game? Give me an answer out loud right now. How could you just lie like that? How could you lie to me? This game is great. It's like Kolchak, but if he was a federal agent instead of a reporter. And he saved the day thanks to a lifetime of training and not a magic straw hat. I only saw a few episodes, but I'm assuming that's where it was headed. You alright? You're making a noise.
Functions are Great, elite, A.
Great, huh? This is pretty strong wording for an unfeeling robot.
I remembered something.
Was it the code to give Stranger a big head? Because I'm all over that.
I require your festive blanket.
What, this one? Why?
I don't know.
Just as the Colonel warned, the forest is crawling with werewolves. But beyond that, it's kind of a supernatural war zone. There are signs of conflict between werewolves, vampires, and human hunters. If you want, you can shrug your shoulders and say, huh, weird. Anyway, see you in hell, furry. But one of the villagers makes mention of a hunter named Yuri that may be of some assistance, so you can pay him a visit, and this does, to some degree, explain why there are specifically these werewolves still in Germany, even though Stranger has claimed to have killed all of them. Yuri is the last of his people, a group of what he refers to as a slur, but I suppose that is okay if he says it, I don't know. In order to protect Falkenberg from repeated attacks by Voiku's vampires, many of his people skilled in the dark arts chose to skinwalk as wolves, making it much harder for them to make it through the forest. That is until Voiku figured out how to summon sentinels which could just fly over it instead. With nothing left to do, the skinwalkers looked at each other incredulously and asked, "They fly now?" Looking back at the sentinels flying overhead and then back at each other, confirming They fly stuck as wolves for centuries. These guys just went feral, becoming one with the beast they were masquerading as. So it sounds like Stranger's getting away with it this time on a strange technicality. The castle is brimming with all manner of vampire and monster, some of which clearly answering the grim question of what happened to the daughters of Falkenberg. The two split up to look for Count Voiku, and in a crumbling tower we find a parchment that describes a holy staff, believed to be the only thing capable of taking down the leader of monsters. After sweeping the area, Svetlana suddenly appears and begins to behave strangely, angry with Stranger. She even takes a swipe at him with one of her blades, leaving a confused Stranger wondering what the heck is up with her.
She's not the woman you knew before.
I don't know why I always feel like this guy is gonna walk up and say, "Shit, Brody, I've been there before. They are complicated." Right? Yeah, you wanna go play Xbox?
No.
This little minion of Count Voiku shows up to tell Stranger that his master has taken an interest in Svetlana, and thus she is no longer the woman he knew, implying that he has some kind of psychic hold over her, influencing her emotions. This is how his other brides were compelled to join his ranks. This spell can only be broken with Voiku's death, something shared to make Stranger feel hopeless but doesn't really have the intended effect.
You can't kill him. He's immortal.
If you only knew how many immortal creatures I've killed.
We find that holy staff tucked away in a mausoleum, and then head into the sewers, which is clearly the true lair of Count Voiku. Through a series of medieval traps and pitfalls we find him, and ram this holy staff through him. Count Voiku is dead. We got him. Mission complete. Uncle Sam won. Forces of Darkness? Well, one. They killed a lot of people too. We'll call it even. A woman, not yet turned vampire, appears along with Svetlana, who is feeling better now that Voiku's influence is gone. I feel like maybe we should have vibe checked the rest of his brides instead of mowing them down, but that's just me. Seems like we're giving Svetlana the benefit of the doubt, and we didn't really offer that to them. Oh well. In a decidedly by-the-numbers little adventure, we're thrown a curveball. When they offer to take the girl back to her parents in Falkenberg, she says she's not even from there. Also, a painting on the wall looks suspiciously like the mayor of Falkenberg. Svetlana begins to piece together a theory that the mayor is actually the true lord of this castle, and that Voiku was his son who had exiled his father along with the rest of the castle's inhabitants to Falkenberg. The man they met in the graveyard was fleeing not just the sentinels but the townsfolk, which were presumably all vampire refugees. This is interrupted by the mayor teleporting into the room to confirm this is the truth. Now that they've done the dirty work of killing Voiku for him, he and his people can move back in. The Yathki stone they were sent to look for is real, and it's what Voiku used to overpower his father, who is still just mayor. He's willing to let the two of you live in exchange for their help. And despite Stranger's protests and pleas that they just kill him now, Svetlana assures him that with the stone, that would be impossible, and the smartest move right now would be to leave with the singular survivor and trail of dead vampires as their win. Compared to other chapters, it's a strangely cute ending despite all the bloodshed and horror. Stranger continues to pout about not being able to kill him, and Svetlana reminds him that he already got to kill a powerful vampire, and maybe we can stop at McDonald's on the way home, as we lead our would-be victim past a beheaded corpse. This also isn't the only one that ends with lingering plot threads of threats that could, in a hypothetical sequel, be catastrophic down the line. There's an air of, we haven't seen the last of so-and-so, but unfortunately, we have. There are more than one concerns Spookhouse has to backburner that could by themselves be the premise of the whole game, but I love that the scenarios we take part in are all relatively small. 1 or 2 person job. I mean, they'd have to be if we're a secret organization. We can't just be running around in densely populated areas solving world-ending problems. The moment we come up against something we can't shoot or set on fire, we're just like, shit, well, I guess we'll regroup for now. This one's a head-scratcher. Have you tried different kind of bullet? Tomb of the Underground God begins in media res. 5 years later, There's no reason for so much missing time, but it's like, alright man, why not? Maybe we'll get back to it later in the Stranger and Hiram are on a train to a small town in Texas called Red Eye. There have been multiple reports of an outbreak of some kind of skin disease, but the town sheriff insists that the real threat is zombies. Another Spookhouse agent named Scat Dazzle is supposed to meet us there to give his medical opinion of the situation. Scat Dazzle is a jazz-loving voodoo priest who occasionally becomes possessed by a Loa god named Baron Samedi. Even the B-Team characters are like written as though they were the main character of their own alt comic in the 90s. That seems like an elaborate backstory to ascribe to this guy you interact with once. Hiram is acting more nervous than usual, convinced someone has been following him since a few states back. Hiram's paranoia is something he describes as an innate supernatural ability he has, so obviously Stranger is skeptical, but he tries to work out who could be following them, throwing out a theory that I guess it could be a survivor of one of the many horricide projects Spookhouse has taken part in, like say changelings or werewolves. An explosion occurs at the front of the train and Hiram is pulled out of the window by a werewolf and killed, which always bummed me out because his arc is so pathetic. His only other big scene is him reminding Stranger that he can sense auras, and Stranger saying, "Nobody believes you, you idiot." But he did appear to successfully use some supernatural ability to predict his own death a few years later. What a power. He may as well have had like a sixth sense for when a bullet is traveling to your head. Equally short window of time to gloat about being right. See, I fucking knew it! It turns out the train was a trap orchestrated by some real werewolves from the same tribe Stranger claimed to have destroyed. The Alpha confronts him on top of a train car and kills him because I forgot to pick up the silver bullets from Hiram's luggage because I'm an idiot. God, the second Stranger saw that werewolf, I bet that must have been devastating.
Damn. He ain't gonna be in Nocturne 2.
Once he's defeated, Stranger leaps off the train. As Red Eye barrels closer, Stranger lands cartoonishly right at the train station and is approached by a reverend who informs him that, unfortunately, Scat Dazzle is dead. Over the past week, all the town's dead have been crawling out of their graves, and Scat died protecting the town church. With the air of a man mildly inconvenienced, Stranger heads to the local saloon to retrieve some rum, which, along with a cigar and some kind of powder, he uses to coax the presence of Baron Samedi, who after some light convincing agrees to revive Scat Dazzle. And I just adore how little this is explained or explored. This is such a menial everyday scenario for Stranger. He's done this countless times. When the Reverend explains that the town is overrun with zombies, Stranger's like, yeah, and? Is that all? Jesus, get to the interesting part. The only moment he seems to recognize the bizarreness of his circumstances is right before he revives Scat. He tells the Reverend he may want to avert his eyes or whatever because he's about to do something proper blasphemous. I'm about to do a thing that dismantles the entirety of your belief system, so you might want to circle the block for a while or something. This Loa is the only character in the game that knows anything about Stranger, and he boasts that he knows all about his dark past, to which Stranger responds,
"Fascinating. Just revive Scat and be on your way."
I'm curious if even he doesn't know about his past, or if he finds the idea of talking to a supernatural creature any longer than necessary so detestable that it's not even worth pulling at that thread. While Scat recovers, Stranger heads into town to look for survivors to bring to the church. And this might be my favorite section of the game. Not only because when I was younger I was legitimately unnerved by it. Zombies? Being in Texas? Checking doors, getting jump scared when a zombie would suddenly appear right in fucking front of me after the camera angle changed, but it highlights how much of a weirdo Stranger is when he has to interact with a bunch of average civilians and ferry them back to shelter. Like, he's not good at this part, and there is some surprisingly spot-on comedic timing utilizing this.
"Let me in. I'll take you to the church. You'll be safe there."
How do I know you're not another one of those monsters?
Because they don't offer to help?
After reuniting some children with their parents, one of them tells Stranger about a place he calls the Pit, an old abandoned mine that he's seen monsters coming out of. At first, this place is kind of unassuming, and much like the trunk of a Hollywood executive's car, it's just full of dead miners. This area has a segment where you need to bypass some poisonous gas using a gas mask, but I feel like we under-designed this bad boy. Not too certain if this forms the best seal. You know what I mean? These coal miners should have asked their union rep to advocate for gas masks that weren't cut out of the back of a cereal box. Some of you are gonna get the gas mask, and some of you gonna get Lucky the Rabbit. But eventually it gives way to a strange subterranean lair, and at the bottom dwells a massive insect-like being hovering above a series of pedestals. It's kind of remarkable that in comparison to the other parts of the game, this whole segment is like a wordless gauntlet of platforming challenges and traps and monster ambushes that has you collecting a bunch of discs that get put into this ring of pillars around the creature. This ancient primordial being, who I only know is named Gardath thanks to the subtitles, was awoken from a several millennia long slumber by this tentacle priest and was feeding on the inhabitants of Red Eye to strengthen it. It didn't immediately kill Stranger because it sensed he was a more powerful being than the priest and wanted him to replace him as his steward, I guess. This upsets him and he insults the being, but is quickly punished by his monsters. Just then, Scat Dazzle appears, but under the control of the Loa, and says, "Looks like you found yourself an Elder God. What you're gonna want to do is complete this array of discs that would create a binding spell trapping it here indefinitely." He then starts blasting all the lesser monsters with lightning, allowing Stranger to make his escape. In the end, this winds up being another mission that closes without a proper resolution. Outside, Scat says he'll call in a containment team to make sure the pit is sealed. But Stranger is frustrated that such a creature is just down there, and there's nothing they can do about it. It's another force that is simply too big for them. Which again, you could see this as a flaw in the story, but I admire their restraint. To introduce something like an Elder God and refrain from having our heroes just blow it up and then high-five in slow motion. Even though they have a guy that has a Loa inside him that makes him technically immortal, there are clear limits to what Spook House can handle. Zombies? We got this. Creature older than time itself that leveled a whole town? I think we're gonna have a little asterisk next to that file. The third story is not my favorite as far as the tone or atmosphere, but I do think it is the most fun. It's the kind of idea that I would have loved to see the Nocturne universe continue to produce. Absurd in a multi-layered way, where you have one insane idea, you play with a straight face that's couched in another. It jumps forward 2 years and brings us back to the Spook House briefing room. Colonel Hapscom explains that in Chicago, one of famous gangster Al Capone's hitmen publicly murdered someone. The odd part, the FBI confirmed that the hitman was killed in a shootout well before this hit job. An informant inside Al Capone's gang named Icepick has shared that it's not the first time he's seen once dead gangsters taking part in new criminal acts. Stranger dismisses this as merely clerical errors, a mix-up with the local police, as the idea of the mafia employing the undead would be a bit silly, but Hapscom adds the wrinkle that a German scientist known to have worked on developing technology to raise the dead is known to be holed up in this area. So he theorizes that Al Capone has been using this German Frankenstein, that's redundant, to recycle his goons. When they get torn to shreds in one of the nightly turf wars, they just get sewn back together and pushed back out on the streets.
What happens when this savage abuse of nature spreads beyond Chicago?
If you say so.
He's such a brat. I love it. There's a scene right before the end of the briefing that I don't understand the purpose of. I have to believe this was laying the ground for something meant to happen later that doesn't get a payoff. A guy named General Briggs shows up and Hapscom introduces him as the army liaison Stranger will be working with, who could potentially provide Spook House with an armed regiment of soldiers who will take the organization's secret to their grave, should the need arise. This never comes up again. The character shows up again, but in an equally pointless scene. But I wonder if, since it is the 1930s, they were perhaps setting up the premise that Blood Rain would come to use, where the Spook House parallel, Brimstone Society, would work in secret to dismantle the Nazi Party's supernatural pursuits. I think it makes sense. I always appreciated that you could once again explore the office, and little things here and there have changed to denote time's passage. Different stuff on the bulletin board, including a note that Moloch is now MIA. Holiday is out on assignment, but was studying some of the creatures you faced in Texas. And Svetlana is doing some training. Look at her go. She's great. In Chicago, Stranger meets up with Icepick, but there's a bit of tension when he realizes that he too has been sloppily reanimated by the German scientists. fuck! As he's covered in a network of stitches. He's able to talk him out of shooting him though, making it clear that Spook House needs his help if they want to stop this from happening to anyone else. Icepick was supposed to meet a newspaper reporter in a speakeasy nearby, but wants to send Stranger in his place because he looks like a hideous freak. Using a code they agreed on, he makes contact with the guy who shares that a fellow journalist had snuck into the factory where these reanimated mobsters are being produced and recorded the process on a film reel. Unfortunately, he was found, killed, and his film is now in the possession of the mobsters. This conversation is interrupted when a hit squad shows up and starts gunning everyone down, leaving Stranger as the sole survivor. The film is being kept in the movie theater, which is locked down and under mobster control. Icepick has the idea to have Stranger enter from the sewer, and for a brief moment they work together to steal a manhole key. You're attacked several times, but Icepick is such a fucking tank, he basically just bonks them and they turn into bits. Eventually we get our hands on the reel, but Al Capone's personal cleanup man Smiley attacks Stranger, and he's seemingly invincible, impervious to guns. That is until Icepick shows up and throws us a big gun. Icepick is concerned because it apparently took the mob weeks to get him back in working order. But according to that film, it looks like they've streamlined the process and can pump out several of these guys in a day. The good thing is he recognizes where the factory is and they split up with plans to meet there.
See if you can find another way out. I'll hold these guys off.
You're sure?
Go!
God, Icepick is such a sweetheart. Fucking best character, man. When we get back to Spook House, I'm gonna recommend we send... Icepick lets Stranger know that because he plans to blow it up, he's not gonna follow him in. The rejuvenation process has made him, and the others like him, exceptionally flammable. But Stranger leaves him with just about the sweetest thing he said to another living thing.
Your assistance has been quite useful.
From here forward, it's a one-man massacre. Stranger just makes his way through this place, gunning down every last one of these guys, including Smiley again, who's got his head back on, so this time we set him on fire. Stranger sets the place to blow, and as he's making his way out, he's one final time confronted by Smiley. But we knock him into a vat of acidic chemicals that probably does something. Well, whatever it is, you ain't gonna like it. Most of the levels tend to change things up often, playing with tone and atmosphere, and this one is no exception. There are moments that indulge in the world's film noir influences, jazz, speakeasies, Tommy guns, and parts where its pacing slows, forcing you into claustrophobic hallways and back rooms with lurking Franken-mobsters. Even with all of its strengths and containing some of my favorite moments in the game, it's a bit of an awkward level, too big and empty for its own good, and too generous with ammo and health drops. When I was younger, I used to play it over and over again, trying to find new areas and weird quirks in it. And I specifically remember trying to break the game to allow me to save the lounge singer, because if you sit through the entire song, she gets off stage and walks into, I guess this is a dressing room, it looks more like a stark hallway with a mirror at one end. So when the mobsters break in, she would realistically be spared. But when they spawn in place, there is one that specifically walks behind the curtain to shoot her. When the meeting with the reporter cutscene is over, Stranger is sitting on an invisible chair and has to finish that animation of standing up, and then do the one for taking out his weapon, and then you have to hope you hit the guy before he rounds the corner. But if you skip the cutscene before he sits down, it buys you an extra fraction of a second, and after several attempts, I finally managed to kill this guy before he even gets in the doorway. Hey lady, I saved you! No need to get up, it's all in a day's work for Spook House. A reward? That is not necessary. Justice is its own reward. You're too kind, madam. Too kind. What's that? Well, wouldn't say no to that. What time do you get off? Sounds delightful. I'll see you then. Have a good night. The final volume of Nocturne once again jumps ahead 2 years and opens with a frustrated Stranger. After all this time, still completely unwilling to play along with the cloak and dagger charade of being in a secret government organization, refusing to say the secret password phrase to be led into the office.
Have a nice day.
What's left of it.
The reveal that Icepick was here 2 years later as an official Spookhouse operative was probably the most elation I'll ever experience beyond seeing the trailer for Underworld. That means Stranger had to have spoke highly of him in the after mission report, and of course implies that he does have a heart after all. This time around, Hapscom has a personal request, off the books. It concerns a former Spookhouse agent named Hamilton Killian. He retired shortly before Stranger was inducted, but before then, he was their Stranger, their top agent from 1909 to 1922. Apparently, he asked Hapscom if they could send their best to help him with a powerful supernatural force that has appeared near his home in France. If you want to, you can run right out the door and start the mission, but if you chat up the rest of the office, you learn that Svetlana also just missed him when she joined the team, and heard that he had a nervous breakdown forcing him to retire. Stranger adds that his wife was killed by a vampire, and when Spookhouse allowed Moloch to join, it sent him over the edge and he quit. Icepick brings up Moloch's notoriety, but he never had the opportunity to meet him. Ever since he was sent on a mission in Spain 7 years ago, he's been missing.
Killian had a really intense hatred for all monsters. Not unlike the Stranger here.
It's funny how Svetlana just vents about both Killian and Stranger's monster racism, as though he's not here. Guys, bad enough having this hateful bigot in the office. If I had to work with Killian, I'd probably oh hey dude, what's up? Stranger arrives in France and meets Killian outside his home. He seems cordial enough and pleasantries are dispensed with quickly. He goes into his problem, which compared to what we've been up against, already sounds like the equivalent of landscaping duty. In the graveyard on his property, reanimated skeletons and demonic imp creatures have began appearing, and even killed his groundskeeper. He's tried killing them, but they seem to just return in greater numbers, and he's at his wit's end about how to handle the situation before his home is overrun with them. Sure enough, the graveyard does seem to be rife with skeletons and little demon guys. Stranger quickly deduces that a witch's staff hidden in a mausoleum is the culprit. After figuring out a magic means of destroying it, he remarks that this is basic black magic shit, that Killian, renowned monster hunter, would 100% know how to deal with, and he storms off to confront him about it. Killian attempts to hide his motives for a while longer, but when it's clear Stranger will not trust him, he's hit with a bolt of lightning and passes out, waking up without his weapons in a dungeon with a chained werewolf. Also what appears to be the remains of Moloch, his amulet lying in a pile of bones. As you explore Killian's home, it's clear he's devised it to be some sort of H.H. Holmes-like murder dungeon full of traps and monsters and puzzles that Stranger is meant to navigate while he observes from a control room. He's created this place with the sole intent of torturing and killing monsters, a desire he extends to Spookhouse operatives that have agreed to work alongside monsters. He taunts Stranger with Moloch's corpse and calls him a monster lover. Pretty much every creature we've come across so far makes an appearance in his home, including some new ones, like a succubus that attempts to seduce Stranger into getting close to her, and his big move to avoid this from happening is turning the lights off. Good luck tempting me when I can't even see you. Later, Killian tells you that you handled the succubus better than any other subject before him, which does nothing but diminish my respect for Spookhouse agents. Every one of them put through this gauntlet of deathly trials got to the succubus and thought, ah, this must be my reward. This level is a harder return to survival horror after Chicago, stuck in an orchestrated haunted house, knowing that pretty much every room was devised to fuck with you in some way. On top of that, it almost accidentally follows the loose rules of survival horror because in the game you are in a game. Your supplies are intentionally made scarce by Killian, wanting you to have a sporting chance but not enough to actually make it past his monsters, traps, and puzzles. It's the only level that encourages you to not engage enemies. At first because they would just get back up again and be a waste of ammo, but later because you don't have any. Oh, to see the great gun kata expert Stranger brought so low.
I will report to Spookhouse that you died valiantly, ridding my estate of monsters.
Stranger makes it deeper into the house's dungeons than he was probably meant to, and uncovers a walled-off prison where Moloch is being kept, still alive. He's been stuck down there all this time after being kidnapped by Killian. The body upstairs was a double he magically constructed in an attempt to escape. Killian's been unable to devise a way to kill him, so he just sealed him up with a binding spell. Though it pains him, he shows considerably more tolerance for monsters, and agrees to free Moloch and help him regain his power so that they can take on Killian together. After warming up on a fire and feeding on fresh blood, Moloch bursts into Killian's control room as he pleads for Stranger's help, to which Stranger coldly walks in place stuck in the geometry of the level, creating a game-breaking glitch. I mean, he doesn't say anything. He just leaves and lets Moloch slowly kill him. Back at Spook House, Stranger makes it clear that he didn't free Moloch out of the goodness of his heart. It was purely a strategic move to get the upper hand on Killian. Nevertheless, Hapscom commends him on his ability to work in harmony with their more monstrous agents, leaving the chapter by expressing concern that Stranger shows a similar, alarming amount of hatred, and he'd hate to see him go down the same path as Killian. After this, another very brief chapter is unlocked in the main menu called Epilogue. It takes place 7 years later and shows Stranger stepping off the elevator and making his way to the secret Spook House entrance, only to find the secretary dead. Inside, the lights are off and the floor is littered with the torn up pieces of the other operatives. You can sort of make out Haystack and Ken and Holiday maybe. They're all a little mixed up, but it's clear Spook House as a whole has been gutted by someone or something. In the briefing room, Hapscom is in pieces and a message has been written in blood. Finally found you, Stranger. And as if they knew you'd be upset, they top it off by zooming right into it. Now, as far as cliffhangers to leave a doomed franchise on, it's pretty rough. This is pretty much the worst case scenario, right? This hugely significant thing happens that alludes to Stranger's identity that also leaves the fate of most of its cast in question. It's hard to find the light in it, the good, and I mean, I haven't. It sucks. The only solace I can take in never learning how this plays out is that I guess they can't fuck it up if they have never had a chance to. I love Blood Rain. It is one of my favorite games and high up on that list, and I think Blood Rain 2 is very, 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 very okay. I love it like I would an order at a coffee shop that the barista got wrong, but I'm too weak-willed to say anything about it. Yummy! This is what I wanted, and I guess I didn't have to do that for Nocturne. I didn't have to see its idea ran through a corporate shredder. It lives on in my memory like a perfect, janky, golden, beautiful, fucked up monolith. Before Nocturne was even released, Terminal Reality did several interviews, and one thing that struck me as interesting in looking back at them was that it was important to them that the world depicted in the game not have a final boss. There is no big bad force puppeteering supernatural forces to conquer the world. The work will never end. Even when you create these mass extermination campaigns for certain species, they just fucking come back. Because of course they would. We're talking about things so adept at hiding themselves that 99% of the world doesn't even know they exist. I guess when you examine this logic, that also means there is truly no main narrative to point to as the point of the story. Rather, there are neat threads of ideas that show up in the background if you're willing to poke around for them. Like a bunch of random episodes of The X-Files, but there are enough mythology threads that you can say, oh, okay, I get what they're doing. From what I can tell, there was a lot written for the game, and seemingly significant things were hacked out even late into production. Initially, they did want to lean into a Mulder and Scully dynamic by having two playable characters you could switch between that would have banter and presumably teeth-grinding sexual tension. Stranger's counterpart was going to be a woman named Gabriella Agostini, and her removal came late enough that the manual still makes mention of her as being a part of Spook House. They also mentioned two dudes named Carricker Thompson and Rogan Parthaswanu, and they joined around the same time as Ken Rizkin. Fuck, name these people. Nobody has a human name. Everybody's got a name like Roberto de Grabbed by the Ghoulies. I like that monsters are just a fact of life, and for the most part, they aren't treated as cardboard cutouts to mow down. Most of the time. if they are shown in such a way, it's to highlight the moral ambiguity of Spookhouse's efforts. It's a paradoxical concept that the story acknowledges and slips in reference to every now and then. There's even an exchange between Stranger and Hapscom that was something to the effect of, most of Spookhouse's agents would be dead right now were it not for the bag of supernatural resurrection and revival tricks they've picked up along the way. These are monster hunters, but they also work alongside monsters and dabble in forces that they perhaps shouldn't. So obviously some monsters have enough agency and empathy to be spared, befriended, made co-workers, so where is the line? In each of the levels we're shown different degrees of separation from humanity in characters like Svetlana, Scatdazzle, Icepick, and Moloch. They all have a thing that on paper makes them worthy of hunting down by Spookhouse's own logic, and Stranger deals with them in different ways. He definitely displays some problematic conduct around his fellow agents, but usually begrudgingly acknowledges their usefulness. And all this culminates to a showdown between Stranger and his own prejudices brought to an extreme. This is all me being able to half-assedly intellectualize my adolescent excitement, but there was a lot of vibe-based logic that made Nocturne such a memorable experience. And I always held this weird reverence for it in the back of my head that I couldn't really share with anyone else. I didn't know anyone that played Nocturne. Until the last decade, nobody knew what I was talking about when I brought it up. There are few games that I can say left this kind of mark on me, that I got the full nostalgic formative video game experience with. I don't remember significant life-altering events in my life, but I remember standing in what was, at the time, Babbage's at the Plaza Bonita Mall, but it would go from that to an electronics boutique to EB Games and then finally die as a GameStop. If there's one thing GameStop did, it was live up to its name. It stopped gaming. Anyway, I remember seeing the spine of Nocturne on a shelf of big boxes, sliding it out and being captivated by the bizarre true crime journal packaging and the genuinely unnerving looking screenshots. I had never even heard of it, and yet suddenly I was holding the coolest thing I had ever seen. It's so classy, it's trying to creep you out before you've even got the disc in. And even now when I think about it, I get a blurry glimpse of a 10-year-old me holding that box, pissing myself in terror, running out of that shop with the game in hand, and pants just full of piss. I'd play it in brief shifts, making my way through one area, then pausing to pace around and dream about what came next. My imagination running wild, fueled by the game's unpredictability and cinematic flair. Falling into holes, yes, but rising from those holes, living to fight another day, to find another hidden corner of this world, to mess with the brightness settings to try and see more of the environment, and to fall in another hole. Games used to mean something. One of the interviews with Terminal Reality I found has the interviewer asking how Nocturne is different, but worded in a way that presumably had the implication, as a third-person horror game with pre-rendered backgrounds and fixed camera angles, how do you justify your existence in the presence of Resident Evil, which only a month prior released its third entry? While it does have a number of outdated qualities and barriers to entry for a new player, I think you'd quickly realize that it is only like Resident Evil if you see it frozen in screenshots. There is a noticeably bigger emphasis on action and plenty of platforming, puzzle work, and exploration, but with that comes experimentation, misfires, jank. Even with the mixed results, I do get the impression that they intended to make a survival horror game that was both more accessible to adults and offered a more visceral, exciting experience than Resident Evil. Not saying that this is what they accomplished here, I'm just trying to read their logic, because it does feel like an approximation of survival horror created through a totally different creative pathway. The unique nature of its game engine also wasn't really repeated anywhere else outside of the Blair Witch games. Environments have the smooth, professional look of a pre-render, but they also have 3D geometry behind them. So you can walk around elements, jump on them, or get stuck on them and die. One thing the devs mentioned that always intrigued me was that the entire idea for the game being a horror game really came about because of lighting. While they were making Infernal Engine, they saw renders of how light and fog could be used to make atmospheric horror levels, and it does often nail these little moments that feel cinematic and creepy, having gone as far as consulting a director of photography for films in order to frame up the camera angles. This is occasionally remarkably effective. Even in this playthrough, I would stop and marvel at certain shots, but there are an equal number of moments where this fails and you're stuck shooting at something off camera or walking into a hole, resulting in a death I can only describe as mortifying. The camera is both one of Nocturne's great successes and largest issues. I've heard a lot of criticisms over the years of fixed camera angles just as a concept in games. Less so now as indie games have kind of revitalized them, but I think it was always a balancing act you played. It was certainly something you could get wrong, and there were plenty of games that did get it wrong. Nocturne displays some of these pitfalls, like the possibility of running off camera and there being far too long a lag before you're back on screen, or having an artfully framed angle that obscures an obstacle or some kind of immediate danger like a car barreling towards you. There are certainly lessons you could learn from film that could be utilized in game design, but Nocturne does show that this can be used to excess. The amount of times you think, wait, where the fuck's my guy, should ideally be 0. There are 2 mechanics in the game that I can only assume were implemented to ease the occasional frustration of its camera system. One is that weapons auto-lock onto enemies to varying degrees of efficacy, but often you know an enemy is nearby because Stranger's rigid akimbo stance is divided and he points towards an approaching enemy. This doesn't necessarily mean you will hit what he's aiming at so much as it means, you know, there's a thing over there, so look out. The other thing is using Stranger's night vision goggles. Because levels are rendered in 3D, you can switch to first person and get this weird amorphous shape vision that almost makes the game a first person shooter, just dark and only for 10 seconds at a time as its battery drains pretty quickly. I never got much use out of it, but I appreciate the pointless novelty of its inclusion. I actually feel like making an addendum to this thought, because in capturing footage I kind of did a 180. I knew I was going to say this, so I made a concerted effort to use the goggles more, and I kind of get it now. It's surprisingly painless to just map the key a little closer to WASD and toggle it on and off when needed. Sometimes it actually heightened the eeriness of certain scenes when you can only see like a little blocky guy hobbling towards you. Oh no, who's this guy? Oh no, this guy. So as far as band-aids go, this is one of the more inventive ones. Getting back to combat, it's odd that I wouldn't say there is a strong need to preserve ammo for much of the game outside its final areas, but you are also encouraged to unload on enemies. If you find bullets, it's going to be like 50 rounds, and you will burn through that pretty quickly. There's also a variety of bullet types that you won't find as frequently, like silver, aqua, and mercury rounds, which more strongly affect different monster types. You get other weapons like a simulated sunlight weapon with a long cooldown, and a crossbow that shoots wooden stakes, but more often than not, most things can be blown away with your pistols or a shotgun. I do appreciate that an attempt was made to diversify enemy AI. Not all of them are just waiting for you to walk by so they can make a beeline to you and get your ass. Some, like the vampire brides, will teleport behind you or levitate and zip around, making them hard to hit. These gals can move. Reminds me of when I'm trying to parallel park. Gargoyles will remain stone and then randomly come to life, often when you're not facing them or have your weapons put away. Ghouls and zombies might be the most lesser of the enemies, but even these are just hard to definitively kill. They get back up several times even with missing limbs. Sometimes they throw those missing limbs at you, allowing you the opportunity to throw them right back. I think moment to moment the combat is enjoyable and satisfying, especially when enemies get pieces blown off or spray blood onto a wall. I'm sick and twisted that way. I like it when the guys die, but boss fights highlight how simplistic and silly combat can be, and seem to be governed by whether or not you have the type of weapon that would be effective on this boss. Either way, you're probably just going to be running in circles, emptying mag after mag into these guys. Well, not really. You actually never need to reload by some act of spookhouse devilry. The most tactical reload is not having to at all. There is an incentive to explore levels more deeply, secret supply caches to find, find, or even when you're not out in the field, there are characters to talk to and lore to uncover, but there are plenty of areas that feel kind of pointless and wasted. I get the impression it was the result of cut content, but it's not like there was any kind of nefarious publisher interference. They just knew launch is coming up and we're probably not going to get around to this part, so fuck it. I feel this most in the Chicago level, where there are numerous alleys, storefronts, and liminal spaces that don't really serve much of a purpose other than to make it hard to track down where you're supposed to be going.
What the fuck is that?
Sometimes there will be enemies or item drops in these places, so clearly they wanted you to be there. They are just not only irrelevant to the task at hand, but out of the way from it as well. But still, they went through the effort of making a subway car, all for the sake of a medkit, I guess. Another survival horror staple that is abandoned are save points, because once you start platforming, you're gonna want the freedom of manual saves. There's a lot of trial and error involved due to how squirrely and unpredictable jumps can be, and they intentionally try to trip you up in these situations by having some spots you can land on give way and fall, or have something knock you off before you can successfully jump. I wouldn't say it's something the game excels at, nor would I say it's all that good at, but it's still charming in its own right. There's a bit of apologizing I engage in when talking about most games I enjoy that I've been trying to at least not use as a crutch, but it's a weird little game that most importantly provides a unique, unreplicable experience. I can't get what it feels like to play Nocturne anywhere else. And the closest thing is a Blair Witch tie-in that time forgot, which is a strange reality. There are brief but brilliant flashes of atmospheric horror, and a mixed bag of mechanics and ideas that might be a little too unpredictable and unhelpful for their own good. Hugely inventive sequences frequently punctuated by moments that are so frustrating that they circle around to being really funny. I can't think of another game where I would die so often and almost every time just be baffled as to how it happened and how abruptly it happened. Like I needed a moment to process the physics behind it. Were I more of a survival horror elitist, I'd struggle with labeling Nocturne that. It does embody most of its tenets, but not consistently, arriving in the ballpark by its own twisted psychopath. And often most of the difficulty, the fight for survival, will be brought about by either the camera or holes. 90% of the time I died, it's because I fell down and I got hurt and I died. And I think that does provide a tension in itself. It's like you're always platforming. You could be walking down the steps of a building and the stakes are just as high as if you were suspended above a lava field. Sometimes the game does make an attempt to perform a good old honest to goodness, just like Mom used to make, jump scare. And if you're anything like me, you've moved beyond such I shouldn't understate the importance of the technology behind Nocturne. It is the reason the game exists at all, and for a good while it was one of the biggest selling points. Terminal reality made it abundantly clear that Nocturne would be a graphically intense game for the time. If you were still stuck using your OG Voodoo graphics card, it wasn't gonna voodoo you up more graphics. You can't play the game, that's what I'm saying. Get out of here. Get out! There's a number of visual bells and whistles in this game that, to this day, look at the very least interesting. Neat! As a time capsule of sorts. Of course, a lot of these concepts have been substantially improved, but not all of them, I would say. The lighting and shadows are probably the biggest one here, and while it has certainly aged and looks archaic in a lot of ways, the fact that these both look as good as they do is insane. There's a lot of things you just kind of take for granted in modern games that Nocturne wanted to improve on before they were even considered all that often. Seeing light somewhat accurately interact and play off of what would in any other game be a pre-rendered unchanging background was hugely impressive. Unfortunately, it seems like every time I have played this game, it has been under different conditions. The first time on original hardware was obviously the best, but playing this game on modern machinery will undoubtedly include some weird visual glitches that are just randomized. This time around, the edges of the screen would, like, wobble? I've never seen that before, like the game was struggling to maintain its own aspect ratio. Also, Svetlana's arm blades would flicker distractingly. The third big thing that you've probably been staring at this whole time is the cloth effects, something that even today is near impossible to get so right that you don't think about it. And trying to strive for perfection there just seems like an endless money pit that only a AAA studio would gleefully dive into. I have this random memory that time has made irrelevant, but I still have it, of a behind-the-scenes video for the game Watch Dogs, which was a game with, I think, one of the greatest gameplay trailers I've ever seen. But that experience didn't really carry over to the full game, but that's besides the point. I specifically remember thinking that it was bold of them to have their lead character wear this big coat that flowed in the breeze and moved around with his every step, and to top it off, he walks around with his hands in his pockets, having to go from hands in pockets to out of pocket with phone in hand and back and forth, while this coat is naturally moving based on other factors. Knowing next to nothing about game design, even I knew that that must have been a nightmare to program, and realistically was probably faked for that trailer, but even that was 20-ish years after Nocturne. I remember having a similar fascination with Stranger's Coat. It's bold, it's on screen like the whole time, barring the time you get lost off camera when the angle doesn't change. And when I finally got my hands on a stolen copy of Watch Dogs, I was surprised to find it not entirely as advertised. Honestly, not too different from Stranger's Coat. I think it's had a shorter shelf life, for sure. I mean, it's a bit fucked up. It's a bit fucky. But just the fact that it seemed to move of its own volition, employing physics, technology, I could not yet understand was simply, whew, my gosh. You know, they knew what they were doing. They knew what they were doing leaving these curtains and tapestries everywhere, you little Something that still looks fantastic is blood, something I have a compulsive need to analyze in every game that features it because I'm fucked up. I'm a disgusting person. I'm a little gore piggy. No other game at the time that I can think of took into account the physics and volume of blood. It spatters on the floor, it drips down walls, it pools underneath slain enemies. You can track strangers' footprints through it, and it's still impressively rendered. There are AAA games to this day that just do that singular unimpressive splat decal and call it a day, and it will still disappear the moment I walk a few yards away from it. Why do games still think I give a shit about you conserving memory or whatever? I put that blood there and I want to look at it. I want to see what I've done. I mean, bro, there was a thing there that ain't there no more. What, you think I wouldn't notice? Who's this? Hey, who's this guy? Hey, get the fuck out of here. Yo! It's strange that a game with such a kitschy and cute concept would have this really cavalier attitude about gore and nudity. I mean, one of the lead characters wears like a transparent mesh top the entire time. Stranger's gogglies coming in clutch. Eye contact king over here. Character models still look great in their own blocky wooden way. Even at release, it was a point of contention that faces weren't animated at all, so everyone communicates telepathically. But I don't think that's an issue. I'd rather it be nothing than like a single anime mouth open, mouth closed kind of thing. They're talking. You know how I know that? Because I can hear them. I can hear the voices. They call to me. They tell me to kill. That is, funnily enough, the compromise they make with Blair Witch. And I guess it's nice. Holiday even gets another emotion she can have, and it's kind of cute looking. I think it's more so interesting to see how Nocturne 2 might have evolved in response to feedback. Enemy design is also a lot of fun, and for the most part doesn't depict monsters as cartoons. Werewolves are cutting it close, saved only by how intimidating they are, hopping around on all fours and whatnot, but many of the other demons and vampires and zombies look surprisingly grotesque and detailed. Further making the lack of facial animation a null issue is the quality of voice acting. Compared to its contemporaries, it's much more understated and natural.
He's crazy.
I'm crazy. You come here of your own free will. You're crazy. You'll never escape.
You obviously escaped.
Games like this at the time had really big performances, as if the voice actors didn't really know what their voice was going to be used for. They're in the booth like, so I'm some kind of guy, and this is not a TV series? A video game. Well, like Pac-Man? Should I sound like Pac-Man? Everyone does a really great job. 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 And aids in making the game's cast all memorable characters. Stranger is voiced by the late Lynn Mathis. He's got a gravelly, deadpan delivery, equal parts straight, mysterious, and humorless, thus making it really funny.
You think I enjoy sitting in this little box all day?
Your enjoyment does not concern me.
It's a shame his character didn't get more time in the spotlight because it shares the same perfect yet uncanny space as J.C. Denton. I wish I got to hear him get political on me, call me a commie, bend me over his knee. Whoop. Hang on. Uh-oh. He didn't really have a whole lot of acting credits, but it seems like the most substantial gig outside of some indie movies was the children's TV show Wishbone.
I've come to seek your advice about a case which seems excessively odd.
Odd?
Holiday and Svetlana are both voiced by Candace Evans, who is MIA, but similarly didn't do much acting following Nocturne, showing up in a handful of games like Daikatana where she's credited as additional voices. I couldn't really track down any film roles beyond her small part in a rom-com from the year 2000 about a sexy gynecologist, and I'm committing to watching the whole thing for the purposes of extensive research. Wait, Laura Dern's in this? And Tara Reid? Somebody put the two of them in the same movie? Okay. Hiram and Ken were both voiced by the also late John William Galt, a performance achieved by doing an accent that will prompt one of two reactions. 1. That's not okay. And 2. People are too sensitive these days. I miss when comedy didn't get you thrown in literal prison. My family no longer invites me over.
He must focus all concentration, all of his energy, spiritual and physical.
I think it's okay if this is the only time he did it.
I love the surrogate. Ancient Chinese secret.
Oh, well. I think we'll all agree that the fact that he voiced Joseph Manderley returns some goodwill. And weirdly enough, he was also in Wishbone. Cast reunion. How do you like that? Haystack was voiced by Del Johnson, who was in... What the fuck? Hang on. What is happening? What the fuck? Music is, for me, maybe where they drop the ball a little bit. I'd almost prefer there just be no music, or at least some ambience that comes and goes, but it comes screaming to the front, usually when an enemy is after you, or a trap is triggered, or there is a scripted jump scare. Sometimes I don't even know why it's happening. There's just a spooky thing going on out there, and it's up to you to go out and find it. Which is an interesting experiment that I'd probably like more if the music wasn't clearly a public domain spooky song. I've heard this same composition in other games, TV shows, sampled by metal bands, and it's a fine little song. It's just, I know it, and I know that no effort was really put into that. So it's a little underwhelming. In truth, Nocturne's greatest failing is that it is a game in which rats should be flourishing, scurrying along the stone hallways of a Dracula's castle, or on the docks of the Chicago River. They should be here, and they're not, and I've grown frustrated with my inability to do the rat roundup, because too many games have not had rats, so in order to fill this void, I guess we could highlight a creature that dwells in similar biomes, similarly beautiful, yet detested by the bipedal world. Yeah, why not? It's time for the bat roundup. Hey, what can I tell you? Sometimes you don't get rats, but every now and then you can find salvation simply by looking up and finding God. Damn, bats! Like rats with wings in the best way possible, they have all kinds of skills and carry even more diseases maybe, God love them. The bats in Nocturne show up mostly in the first level, but are quite plentiful, squeaking and swooping around your head while you try to make incredibly precise jumps. The little rascals. If you're lucky, you might even come across a big bat. Too chonky for flight, and too precious for this world. All in all, I'd give them my highest bat roundup rating. Good! But if we're grading on the rat roundup scale. Good. The year was 1945. The first atomic weapon was...
Spectral phenomena detected.
Jesus Christ. Can't you see I'm right in the middle of
Scanning.
What is it?
Likely a Class 2 porphyric hemophilia.
In gamer, please. Shh. Don't you know how to whisper?
Setting volume level to whisper. Protocol dictates you should extinguish all light and hide under your desk.
What is she, a bomb? Jesus. Ooh, there's a fruit snack under here. Interesting texture. Is it still there?
No movement detected.
I'll check it out. Stay frosty. I feel like I owe Nocturne a lot, or rather have it to blame for a lot of my gaming opinions. It's something I've slowly realized over the years. Nocturne doesn't really have a legacy. It didn't leave some unmistakable mark on the landscape of horror games. It was just undeniably its own thing, a pure distillation of an idea that made little compromise other than things maybe cut for time. There was one interview I read that was done days before the game launched, and the interviewer asked someone from Terminal Reality, like, games are often rushed out the door lately and require some kind of day one patch to make the game playable. He was asking if they would need to continue patching the game after its release. How long would they need to support it? But their response was essentially, no, we did everything we wanted. There may have been a sound effect that wasn't where it was supposed to be, but it's otherwise the game we set out to make, as we could make it. Even as a stupid idiot child, I could recognize the spirit behind it, the creative freedom. There were parts that were awkward and janky, and parts that were like literally nothing else I had seen. So I think this experience was formative for me in inspiring my love of games that are kind of stuck between time and place, between advancement and regression. Oddballs. Creepy little guys with a bunch of heart and big ideas they can't possibly render into reality as imagined. On top of that, I maintain that it is a golden premise. That is an evergreen idea that is as ripe for the plucking as it was in 1999. An anthology horror game with vague plot threads and a mythology built around an alternate history full of monsters and supernatural forces beyond our understanding. Money on the table. And I think for the time, they did a surprising amount with it. Obviously, I have to add the caveat, like, there were limitations, but it was fighting those like a madman to bring this idea to life, with the results being spotty but admirable. Cruel cliffhanger aside, it's a really fun story that takes absurd pulpy premises and plays them deadpan in a way that is both functionally serious and dramatic, but also genuinely funny. The gameplay is frustrating, even for someone like me, a weird nerd willing to throw myself in front of a hail of valid criticism. But it's never demoralizing, it's never so punishing that I want to stop playing. It helps that I laugh most of the times I die, because it's just so disrespectful. It's so mean what it does to you. It just ain't right. Well, there I go. Off to another world. Who's to say where that man ended up? Hopefully not the library from Halo. Me, the devs at Terminal Reality, and most of the gaming press seem to be under the universal impression that Nocturne had longevity. Oh yeah, we're gonna be headed right back to this well. And that didn't happen. And I maintain this weird confusion around that, like I got stood up for a Tinder date. I'm sitting there at the coffee shop, putting out the vibe, fussing with my fancy shirt, glancing at the clock. Must be running late. And it's been that over and over again. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. I'm a fucking skeleton. But you know what? I'm nothing if not pathetically hopeful. After all, someone wisely scooped up and capitalized on Blood Rain. Like that just happened. So who's to say, a night dive or a night dive won't someday wrangle the rights and at the very least make the game easier to track down and play. Maybe put out some merch, maybe like a cool hat. Nocturne's legacy. It deserves a hat. It deserves a hat. And then he said it deserved a hat a few more times, and that was the end of the video. Thank you for watching it. This video took a very long time for me to make, and I hope you picked up on the desperation behind its editing and pacing. They say it's the videos for the games that you love that are the hardest to edit. If you'd like to support this channel, consider becoming a patron. Consider liking, subscribing, following on Twitter or Tumblr or Discord. The next video is already being made and hopefully will not take as long as this one did. But thank you again for all your support, and an extra special thanks to Ailing Uncle, 2Password for Kids, Again Dean, Alex, Raymond, Alexander Smith, Alexander Moditlevson. Let me know how wrong I pronounced that. Annabelle, I misspelled my name last time. I need more sleep, but they are crawling on the walls. Please help. Fuchs. Aparts 89, Benjamin Sid Perez, Big Abuela Energy, Breeze McKenzie, Close Quarter Wombat, Cole Davies, D-Sky, Daphne Pittendry, Dark Raptor 86, Deluminati, Demo Markov, Dr. Beard, DOS Days, Edgy, Edward Avila, Fart Mother, Game Master, Gaming with Clarptarp, Gamma, High Food Court, I Cook Bacon, Jack the Dave, Jake Steele, Jay Alameen, Joseph Zanoni, Carrot, Luke Allen, Marcus Chaney, Michael Schmidt, Morgan Harper, Morg Detrius, Nekot the Brave, Octo, Oisto, Philip Woolley, Rahul Kirthi, Roland, Salvatore Tosti, Snapplefish. This deal is getting better all the time. Turts, your problems make my dick soft. Zach Bishop, Daniel Streb, Ava Nerve, Giraffa, Gunmancer, Karen Rosenau, Catherine Graven, Swoot Operator, T-Dog 8083.
Grim baby, you just gotta stop unplugging my CPAP at night. I know it's you, you fucking mook.
410,757,864,530 gay cops. A Hanging Chad, Albert Hunley, Bang Flang, Binary Vision, Brady the Sanity Tax Collector, Brozoof Jones, Cantankerous, Chimichanga Jones, Dubs, Eric Yowden, Fix My Brain, Ishanji, Jeremy, J-Man DX, JP, Mad Monty 98, Make It Raynor, Ophelia Fishwife, P Dizzle, Persian Air. Please stop treating player agency as a negative. Leaning left-right manually isn't a fucking cover system, it's basic movement. Robert Brandon, Roddy Rowdy Peeper, Samuel Ward, Simon Daniel, Technica, 10-Beat, The Angry Pebble, Where Am I? Help, Alistair Stewart, Alexander Olbrich, Alfred Coria, Ali G, All the Nope, Andrew Light, Andy Krieger, Astro Shepherd, Atari Steed, Auspicious Whiskers, Beef, Ben and Cara Dowling, Benjamin Payne, Benji Blakeway, Bindle, Bishy93, Biddles 999999, Bivdub, Brendan McFadden, Brett Weaver, Brody Gibson, Bweeb Weep Wop, Carl Hanna, CJ the Sky Pupper, Colby, Contrefair, Colta Fleda, Daniel Chernovsky, David Fromke, David Harpstrite, David's Baby Bilkeys, Dazed Clockwork, Dongs.exe, Eto, General Klizera, Ghoul Baby Bond, Goth Hunter Cast, Darkened Streams #2 fan, Haley Bobella, Haywood Jablomi, Hitoshi-san, INTJ loves her INTP, Irish Wristwatch, Jake Desi, Jake Raynor, Jerry, Jimmy Changa, June Choi, Jordan Balzano, Joshua David, J Raptor, Captain Ketchup, Lori Kubre, Leland Miliokas, Leopold Gloom, M, Mandalore Gaming, Marauding Fraud, Marcy Bones, Max Cohen, MCR, Micah J. Best, Miles Phillips, More Sharks, Mr. Alpacleton, Mr. Ducky Quack, Mystical Lint, Name Requires DLC, Nick Timmons, Noel M, Nuclear Sun, Nolrom, Oliver Marshall, Opichi Kostra, Paul Blart Malgoth, Paul Fierce, Remy Pan, Replicant, Ruibi Somem, Samejima, Rat Roundup's #1 fan, Scarlett, Scofflaw D, Shadanon, Silatixo, maybe, that's probably wrong, Skylar J. Leal, Sob Akaduka, Startide, Sinulia, Team R, Through the Darkness of Future Past, the Magician longs to see one chance out between two worlds putty, walk with me, Vilmar Valthorsen, Vincent Cronin, Zanga PF, and Zdienek Benez for being a patron within the tiers that I read. But also, thank you for being a patron beyond then. Otherwise, we'd be here a while. I suppose I did a lot of padding in this video, so like, it wouldn't hurt if we, just hung out for a little while. What have you been up to? That's fascinating. I was working on the next video, which is about the video game The Darkness, released in the year 2007 for the Xbox 360 and PS3, and nothing else. And I've been reading the comics a little bit here. I'm on book 3 of the trade paperback collections, and I'm starting to think this Jackie Estacado guy might be a kind of a morally ambiguous guy. Anyway, I'm gonna get back to work on that. So, thanks again for all your help. Anyway, I was trying to leave. I'm out of here. I'll see you later. Bye. Thank you again.